NeoBlisseyX Versus is now on Ko-Fi. Buy us a coffee at the link in the description field below this video, starting at $5 US, or whatever else you can provide, and you will help improve our ability to bring you the best video content possible. Thanks in advance for your support, and please, enjoy the show. Welcome to another episode of NeoBlisseyX Versus Presents. Amber, are you ready for today's subject?
Of course, Neo.
And as you suggested back in episode 1, we will finally focus on the legendary obstacle course that takes place at the end of every episode of American Gladiators, the Eliminator. Like several of the events seen in parts 1 and 2, the Eliminator was one of the few events to last the entire 7 seasons of the original American series. Even so, the Eliminator was changed at least once per season for that entire time.
Exactly, Neo. In addition to all of the American configurations, we will also cover the configuration from the original United Kingdom series that was used in both international tournaments.
So with all that out of the way, here's Amber with our first configuration.
The Eliminator, in its Season 1A, 1B, and 2 configurations, was played under a time limit, with each second the contender finishes under said limit worth 5 points. Female contenders had 75 seconds to complete the Eliminator, while male contenders only had 60 seconds. In each of these 3 configurations, failure to complete any obstacle properly would give the offending contender a 5-point penalty. Utilizing the female competition from Season 1A, Episode 1 as a base, here's how the scoring format was put into practice. Heading into the women's Eliminator, contender Brenda Hund led her opponent Frankie Perry by a score of 260 to 195, a 65-point differential. Under this format, Perry would have to win the Eliminator by 13 seconds to advance to the quarterfinals. While Frankie Perry did actually win the Eliminator race, she did not do so in the required amount of time, as despite a 5-second penalty assessed to her for holding on to a part of Obstacle 2, Brenda Hund finished her run only 5 seconds after Perry did, ultimately winning the episode's overall competition by a score of 305 to 290. Now, here are the obstacles seen in the 1A configuration. Obstacle 1 started things off by the contenders having to roll a giant medicine ball up a ramp and into a receptacle at the top of the ramp. Obstacle 2 involved the contenders trying to cross a balance beam, while 6 gladiators, 3 to a side, would swing regular-sized medicine balls at them. Obstacle 3 involved the contenders trying to negotiate a set of commando lines. Obstacle 4 was the swing for life, a rope swing over a low wall. To describe the final obstacle, I'm going to let former American presenter Mike Adamley explain.
And at this point, the contender has a series of choices to make. First, I can go down the left corridor, or I can go down the right corridor. In my case, I'll go down the left corridor. And then there's another choice, and maybe the most important choice, which lane to take. I could take the left lane or the right lane. It's quite possible if I pick the right lane, I can go scot-free to the finish line. But if I pick the wrong lane, well, there could be a big bad gladiator waiting for me. Let's hope I pick the right one! Ah! Ooh. Mr. Malibu, I'm glad you weren't over here.
The Season 1B Eliminator configuration was virtually identical up to the final choice, where only one of the 4 corridors was clear of a gladiator guard.
Season 2 saw the introduction of many familiar elements that will remain in future Eliminator configurations. Obstacle 1 would be the reverse treadmill, or the Travelator as it would be called on the original UK series. Obstacle 2 would be a 30-foot-long beam which the contenders would have to clear using a specially designed hand-operated bicycle. Obstacle 3 was a balance beam with a gladiator assigned to each beam. The gladiator's job is to swing a weighted blocking pad at the contender in an attempt to knock them off. Obstacle 4 is a climb up a 20-foot-high cargo net. Obstacle 5 is not really an obstacle per se. Instead, the contender is treated to a ride on a zip line over the entire length of the arena. The final obstacle of the Season 2 configuration is a jump over a pair of hurdles before going into the final corridor, with, again, only one lane being free of a gladiator guard. 2 new situations were first revealed in Season 2 that were presumably in the rules since day 1. However, these contingencies were not revealed until these situations actually occurred. In the event that a contender is injured prior to the Eliminator and deemed unable to continue, the other contender automatically advances to the next round of competition. However, the remaining contender still runs the Eliminator as scoring determines seeding in the following round. In Season 2A, Episode 3's preliminary women's competition, contender Marla Smith had to drop out of the competition just before the Eliminator was set to begin, as she had suffered a bout of hyperventilation and was asked by the show's medical staff to not proceed. As a result, Smith's opponent, Kelly Peacock, automatically advanced to the quarterfinals. However, Peacock still ran the Eliminator for seeding reasons. In the event that both contenders finish the Eliminator in a dead score tie, the contender that logs the faster Eliminator completion time will win the competition. This contingency was revealed in Season 2A, Episode 11's semi-final men's competition, where contenders John Adams and Chris Vopatek ended the Eliminator tied at 51 points apiece. However, as Adams logged the faster Eliminator completion time, 45 seconds to Vopatek's 53 seconds, Adams wound up advancing to the Season 2A finals. When the final scoreboard was shown on screen, a green asterisk was shown next to John Adams' name in order to indicate to the viewer that Adams was the one who would advance.
The Season 3 Eliminator would introduce more familiar elements into the formula, including a crucial rule change that would alter the history of the Gladiator's programming format. That rule change? Giving the contender who is leading going into the Eliminator a head start, 1/2 of a second for each point they are in the lead. For example, a contender leading by 11 points going into the Eliminator would receive a 5.5 second head start. Obstacle 1 would remain the reverse treadmill. Obstacle 2 would remain the hand bike. Obstacle 3 would be changed to a spinning cylinder that could send the contender flying in many different directions. Obstacle 4 would remain the cargo net climb. Obstacle 5 would remain the zip line. Obstacle 6 would be a climb over an 8-foot wall with a rope provided as a climbing method. Obstacle 7 for the first 2 episodes of Season 3 would be a gauntlet where 2 gladiators would use giant medicine balls to impede the contender's progress. This would be changed in Season 3A, Episode 3 to a second 8-foot wall. The final obstacle would be a straightaway to the finish line where 2 more gladiators would toss more giant medicine balls at the contenders. The first contender to break the plane of the finish line, not necessarily the first to break the tape, would win the competition. This rule would be clarified in the grand final of Season 3, when male contender Mark Ortega was declared the winner over opponent Joseph Bam Bam Morrow, when Ortega was the first to break the plane of the finish line instead of Morrow. I remember Neo telling me once that to this very day he is still pissed off that Ortega won instead of his pick Bam Bam, as he thought the rule was only to break the tape, not the plane of the line.
Shut the f*** up, Amber! You weren't supposed to say that! Maybe I ought to talk to Zarva about giving your systems a diagnostic.
Okay, moving on! The hand bike would also receive an upgrade with the institution of a penalty pit system. If a contender falls off the hand bike, they are detained by a gladiator for a designated amount of time. 10 seconds for female contenders, 7 seconds for male contenders. At first, the penalties were enforced by gladiators of the opposite gender. But when the gauntlet was eliminated in Season 3A, Episode 3, the gladiators who would have been assigned to the gauntlet were instead assigned to enforce the penalty.
The configuration of the Season 4 Eliminator was virtually identical to the Season 3 configuration, with the exception of the final obstacle becoming a gauntlet where contenders tried to evade blocking dummies on a rig which is controlled by 2 gladiators. Fun fact, this configuration was not revealed to the public for the first time on American Gladiators itself, but on the popular ABC sitcom Family Matters. In the first episode of that show's 4th season, entitled Surely You Joust, Reginald VelJohnson's Carl Winslow and Jaleel White's Steve Urkel compete on American Gladiators to resolve a private dispute. Several members of the cast of American Gladiators appeared as themselves, including commentators Mike Adamle and Larry Zonka, head referee Larry Thompson, and several gladiators including Lynn Saber Williams, Galen Turbo Tomlinson, and the late Shelley Siren Beatty. Surely You Joust actually first aired on September 18, 1992, just before the first episode of Season 4 of American Gladiators began airing in the United States.
The configuration of the Season 5 Eliminator featured some of the biggest changes to the Eliminator in several seasons. For example, the reverse treadmill, which had been the starting obstacle since Season 2, was now moved to be the penultimate obstacle on the course. The exact configuration would run as follows. Obstacle 1 would now be a 25-foot climb to the arena ceiling using a stair climber. Obstacle 2 would be a slide down 2. Obstacle 3, the hand bike. Obstacle 4 would be the spinning cylinder. Obstacle 5 would be the climb up the cargo net. Obstacle 6 would be the zip line ride. Obstacle 7 would be a climb up an 8-foot plexiglass wall. The final 2 obstacle sequence would be patterned after the identical sequence from the Eliminator scene on the original United Kingdom Gladiator series, which you will hear about in just a moment. Obstacle 8 would be the race up the reverse treadmill. And finally, Obstacle 9 would be a rope swing through a paper barrier. This configuration would be used beat for beat in Season 6, while the Eliminator configuration used in the original American series' final season would only swap out the spinning cylinder for a ball pit.
The Eliminator configuration used in the 2 International Gladiators tournaments was first used in the first heat of Series 2 of the original UK Gladiator series in 1993, and would remain in use until after Series 5 in 1996. This configuration would also use the points for head start formula that had been a part of the Gladiators franchise since Season 2 of the original American series. As a reminder of what that format entails, the contender leading the competition going into the Eliminator would receive a half-second of head start time for every point they are leading over their opponent. Obstacle 1 would be a set of alternating high and low hurdles. Obstacle 2 would be a rope climb up to a platform. Obstacle 3 would differ based on the contender's gender. Female contenders would use an overhead hand ladder, while male contenders would use the hand bike. Falling off either version of this obstacle would incur a 10-second penalty. Obstacle 4 would be the spinning cylinders. Obstacle 5 would be the cargo net climb. Obstacle 6 would be the zip line ride. Obstacle 7 would be a balance beam which must be reattempted from the start if the contender falls off. Obstacle 8 would be the dreaded Travelator, the reverse treadmill as we in America would call it. And the final obstacle would be the rope swing through the paper barrier. The Travelator would prove to be the undoing of many a contender, especially in the international tournaments. Case in point, the Heat 1 Women's Eliminator in the first international tournament where UK 1993 Women's Gladiator champion Jean Clank stumbled on the Travelator, allowing Finnish contender Pirjo Laitila to win the Eliminator and advance to the semifinals.
Neo, I submit myself for disciplinary action.
What for, Amber?
I revealed your personal feelings on the Mark Ortega Joseph Moro Eliminator in a very public way, and thus breaking the trust you had in me.
Amber, it's been over 30 years since that Eliminator was run. I believe that it is time, as Queen Elsa of Arendelle would say, to let it go.
That's a relief, Neo.
Well, with that, we finally come to the end of our three-part look at the events of American Gladiators. For Amber, I'm NeoBlisseyX, saying, take care.
And live long and prosper.
That's my line!
So high, feet on the ground, but I still get by. The rules were made for someone else to try, but not me, not me. They said slow down, son, take your time.